Martha was a fixture in the towering glass skyscraper that housed Braxton Company, one of the most influential corporations in the city. Every day, she arrived in her simple uniform, a pair of well-worn sneakers squeaking softly against the polished marble floors of the lobby. She carried a bucket in one hand and a set of cleaning tools in the other, her face framed by streaks of graying hair tucked under a plain cap. To most of the employees, Martha was invisible. They hurried past her in tailored suits and designer shoes, their focus on their phones or the next big meeting. When they did notice her, it was often with a smirk or a passing remark. "Don't miss a spot, Martha," one of the younger executives joked one morning as he strutted by, his laughter echoing in the empty hallway. She didn't flinch. Years of enduring such comments had made her indifferent to the arrogance of people who thought they were better simply because they earned more or dressed sharply. Martha kept her head down, scrubbing floors, dusting desks, and emptying trash bins. But there was a quiet dignity about her that some of the more observant employees couldn't ignore. One particularly busy Monday, Martha was cleaning near the boardroom during a meeting of the company's top executives. Through the glass walls, she could see them gathered around a sleek table, discussing quarterly reports projected onto a large screen. She worked methodically, careful not to disturb them, but her presence caught the attention of Richard Braxton, the CEO. Richard was a man who exuded power and confidence. Dressed in a sharp navy suit and an expensive watch that glinted under the fluorescent lights, he leaned back in his chair, his feet crossed casually under the table. He glanced at Martha, then smirked. "Why do we even let her clean around here during meetings?" he asked aloud, his tone dripping with disdain. "It's like having a janitor in a palace." The room erupted in laughter, and one of the other executives chimed in. "She probably doesn't even know what we're talking about. These numbers would confuse her." Martha heard the laughter but didn't react. She moved to a corner, wiped down a counter, and kept her head bowed. However, inside, she felt the familiar sting of humiliation. Not because she believed their words, but because it saddened her to see how easily people judged others based on appearances. Though many dismissed Martha, there were a few employees who treated her kindly. Jane, a young intern working in the marketing department, often struck up conversations with her. Jane admired Martha's work ethic and was curious about her life. "Do you ever get tired of all this?" Jane asked one afternoon as Martha polished a brass plaque near the elevators. Martha smiled, her eyes twinkling. "Tired of cleaning? Not really. There's something satisfying about seeing things shine after a little effort. It's the people who sometimes make it hard." Jane nodded, understanding the unspoken meaning behind Martha's words. "You're too good for this place, Martha. Don't let titles and jobs fool you, dear," Martha replied. "Everyone has something valuable to offer, no matter where they are." There were moments when Martha's actions hinted at a depth few could imagine. One evening, as she cleaned a conference room after hours, she noticed a set of documents left on the table. The papers detailed a risky investment plan that Richard had been championing. Martha glanced at the numbers, her brow furrowing. "Reckless?" she muttered to herself, shaking her head. She neatly stacked the papers and left them where they were, but her mind lingered on what she'd seen. Occasionally, she offered small, seemingly offhand suggestions to employees who were struggling. Once, she noticed a young man fretting over a sales presentation. She glanced at his slide deck and said, "Your third slide. It's too crowded. People won't remember all that text. Stick to the key points." The man looked at her, surprised, but followed her advice. His presentation ended up being a success, earning him praise from his manager. He later wondered how a cleaning lady had known such a thing. While Martha quietly observed, Richard's arrogance was leading the company into dangerous territory. Overconfident in his decisions, he dismissed warnings from his team and doubled down on strategies that alienated clients and drained resources. Staff morale was low, and whispers of discontent grew louder with each passing day. Even the board members, who had long supported Richard, began questioning his judgment. But Richard remained oblivious, his ego shielding him from the reality of his failures. Martha noticed everything. The late-night arguments in the conference rooms, the stressed faces of employees, and the way Richard avoided eye contact with anyone who dared to challenge him. One evening, long after most of the staff had gone home, Martha lingered in the lobby. She stared at a portrait of the company's founders that hung near the entrance. Among the faces was a younger version of herself, smiling confidently in a tailored suit. No one knew her story. No one realized that Martha wasn't just the cleaning lady. They didn't know she had once been Margaret Peterson, a co-founder of Braxton Company. When personal tragedy struck years ago, she had stepped away from her role, selling her shares to Richard but retaining a significant stake. She had returned to the company incognito, wanting to see how it had evolved under his leadership. Now, seeing the company she'd built with love and hard work deteriorate, Martha knew it was time to step out of the shadows. As the days turned into weeks, the cracks in Braxton Company's foundation became impossible to ignore. On the surface, the company still projected an image of success, boasting towering profits, a prestigious client list, and a brand associated with excellence. Yet, behind the polished exterior, chaos brewed. Richard Braxton, the CEO, was growing increasingly reckless. His confidence bordered on delusion as he brushed aside constructive criticism and silenced dissenting voices. He surrounded himself with sycophants who echoed his ideas rather than challenging them, creating an echo chamber of poor decisions. The company's financial health was deteriorating, and employees were losing faith. At one point, the marketing department raised concerns about a risky new campaign that Richard had personally approved. The campaign was ambitious, promising results that bordered on fantasy. "We can double our market share in 6 months if we push hard enough," Richard had declared during a meeting. Jane, the young intern, had overheard the whispers around the office about the plan. Some employees privately joked that the CEO had lost touch with reality. "He's betting everything on this," one of them muttered near the coffee machine. "If it fails, we're done for." Martha, who happened to be cleaning nearby, caught fragments of the conversation. She didn't say anything, but her sharp mind pieced together what was happening. Over the years, she had seen companies rise and fall because of leaders who let their egos overshadow their judgment. Late one evening, as Martha polished the floors near the boardroom, she noticed a heated discussion taking place inside. Richard was berating one of his senior managers, accusing him of being too cautious. "We need bold moves, not excuses," Richard's voice boomed. The manager, visibly frustrated, argued back, but it was clear his words were falling on deaf ears. From her vantage point, Martha shook her head. She knew this pattern all too well: an overconfident leader, a silenced team, and a company teetering on the brink of disaster. The brewing crisis wasn't limited to bad decisions. There were darker undercurrents as well. Rumors began circulating about a scandal involving Richard. While details were scarce, some employees whispered about a series of questionable financial transactions and potential misuse of company funds. One evening, while emptying trash bins in the finance department, Martha overheard 2 accountants discussing discrepancies in the budget reports. "Something doesn't add up," one of them said in a hushed tone. "There are millions unaccounted for. I'm telling you, if this gets out." The second accountant cut him off. "Shoo, don't say anything here. You never know who's listening." Martha pretended not to hear as she quietly continued her work. But inside, she felt a growing sense of urgency. The company she had helped build was crumbling, and it was clear that Richard's actions were at the center of it all. The employees at Braxton Company were growing weary. Morale was plummeting as workloads increased and appreciation diminished. Richard's erratic leadership trickled down through the ranks, creating an atmosphere of fear and frustration. One day, as Martha was wiping down tables in the break room, she overheard Jane venting to a colleague. "It's like no one cares about us anymore. We're just numbers to them. Do you know how many people have quit this month?" Her colleague sighed. "At least 5 in my department alone. Everyone's looking for an exit." Martha felt a pang of sadness as she listened. She had always believed that a company's true strength came from its people, not just its profits. Seeing the employees disheartened reminded her of why she had built Braxton Company in the first place. Though Martha remained in the background, unnoticed by most, She was quietly preparing for what was to come. She spent her evenings reviewing old company documents, studying the current leadership structure, and observing key players. One night, as she tidied up an empty office, she came across an old photo of the founding team. There she was, standing proudly next to Richard and the other co-founders. It was a bittersweet reminder of the dream they had shared, a dream that had since been corrupted by greed and ambition. Martha decided it was time to take action. She couldn't stand idly by while the company fell apart. She began drafting a plan, carefully considering how to confront Richard and the board. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she had the power to make a difference. The final straw came during a quarterly town hall meeting. Richard stood on stage, confidently delivering a speech about the company's bright future. He painted a picture of success, ignoring the very real struggles his employees were facing. As Martha listened from the back of the room, she saw the frustration on the faces of the employees. They weren't buying his rhetoric anymore. One brave employee raised a hand and asked about the rumors of financial mismanagement. Richard's response was dismissive. "Those are baseless allegations," he said, waving the question away. "We're on track for our best year yet." Martha clenched her fists. She had seen enough. It was time to step out of the shadows and remind Richard and everyone else what true leadership looked like. In the brewing storm of arrogance, mismanagement, and crumbling morale, Martha prepared herself for the confrontation that would change everything. The seeds of change were planted, and it was only a matter of time before they bore fruit. It was a Wednesday afternoon, the day of the much-anticipated quarterly board meeting at Braxton Company. The large conference room, with its polished glass table and sleek leather chairs, was filled with the company's most powerful executives. At one end of the table sat Richard Braxton, the CEO, his posture rigid with confidence as he reviewed the latest reports. Around him were the senior managers, department heads, and key stakeholders, each in sharp suits, each exuding an air of importance. For most, it was just another routine meeting. The goal was to review the company's finances, strategize for the next quarter, and address any lingering issues. But there was something different about today. Something was in the air, and no one could quite put their finger on it. Martha, as always, was nearby, going about her duties as a cleaning staff member. She quietly moved through the hallways, her bucket and cleaning cloth in hand. She was familiar with the rhythms of the office, the quiet hum of the air conditioning, the click of high heels on the marble floors, and the soft murmurs of conversations in the background. But today something felt off. She passed by the conference room, her mop in tow, when she overheard a heated argument inside. The voices of the board members raised in frustration cut through the glass walls of the room. Richard's voice was loud, authoritative, but there was an underlying desperation in his words. "We're not backing out now. This is the future of Braxton Company," Richard was saying, his voice growing sharper with each sentence. "We're moving forward with the project, whether you like it or not." One of the board members, a senior executive named Carl, responded with clear skepticism. "Richard, this project is hemorrhaging money. The numbers aren't adding up. We need to reconsider." Richard slammed his fist on the table, making everyone in the room jump. "No, we're not turning back. This is my vision, and I'm not going to let anyone derail it." Martha stood still, her mop in hand, listening intently. She could hear the tension in the air. The voices of the executives, once filled with conviction, now seemed fragile, uncertain. She couldn't help but wonder how long it would take for Richard's stubbornness to bring everything crashing down. As the arguments inside the boardroom escalated, Martha finished cleaning the hallway and began to head toward the back of the room to empty a trash bin. She had done this countless times before, never once thinking it would be any different today. But fate had other plans. As she reached the door to the boardroom, one of the junior employees, a secretary named Linda, hurried out. "Oh, Martha, could you take these files in to Mr. Braxton?" she asked, holding a stack of documents. Martha hesitated. She had never entered the boardroom during a meeting. It was a sacred space where the company's most powerful people gathered, a space where she was always kept at arm's length. But Linda didn't know any better. The secretary was busy with her own tasks, and Martha was just the person who cleaned up after everyone. "Sure, Linda," Martha said, offering a small smile, then grabbed the files. Her heart pounded in her chest as she walked toward the door. For a moment, she wondered if she should wait outside until the meeting was over, but something in her gut told her this was the right moment to act. She couldn't stay in the shadows any longer. Martha entered the room, and instantly the conversation halted. The executives looked at her in surprise, but the most stunned of them all was Richard. He stared at her for a moment, unable to process the situation. "Martha," Richard said, his voice tinged with confusion. "What are you doing here?" The executives exchanged confused glances. Martha stood in the doorway, her simple cleaning uniform in stark contrast to the tailored suits of everyone in the room. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. She didn't rush to speak, letting the tension simmer. Finally, with quiet composure, she stepped forward and placed the files on the table in front of Richard. He raised an eyebrow, clearly confused, but still too proud to acknowledge anything beyond the basic formality. "I've been working here for years, Richard," Martha said calmly, her voice steady, her eyes piercing. "And I've been watching what's been happening to this company." Richard's eyes narrowed. "What's your point, Martha? We're in the middle of a meeting, and you're interrupting." Martha didn't flinch. "My point, Richard, is that you're destroying everything we built. You're gambling with this company's future, and your arrogance is going to cost everyone." There was a moment of silence as the weight of her words settled into the room. The executives exchanged uneasy glances, but Richard still refused to acknowledge the truth of what she was saying. "I think it's time for a change," Martha continued, her voice gaining strength. "You've had your run, Richard, but I'm afraid it's over." The room seemed to hold its breath. Richard's expression turned from confusion to anger. "What are you talking about? You think you can just walk in here and tell me what to do? You're a cleaning lady. What do you know about running a company?" Martha smiled, a small, knowing smile that made the room uneasy. She had been preparing for this moment for a long time. "I know everything about this company, Richard. More than you think," she said, her tone sharp, her gaze unwavering. Richard stood up, his face flushed with indignation. "This is ridiculous. You have no right to speak to me like that. I'll have you removed from the building." Martha didn't move. She simply looked at him with quiet determination. Then, she dropped the bombshell that would forever change the course of the company. "I own this company, Richard. I'm one of the founders, and I still hold the majority of the shares." The room went completely silent. The executives gaped at her in shock. Richard, for the first time, appeared lost for words. His jaw tightened as he processed what Martha had just said. He looked from her to the others in the room, but no one was willing to back him up. "How is that possible?" Richard stammered. Martha gave him a measured look. "Years ago, I stepped away from the company for personal reasons. I trusted you to run it, and I took a back seat, letting you think you were in control. But now, I see what you've done, and I won't stand by any longer." The board members, still reeling from the revelation, remained silent. No one knew what to say. They had all underestimated Martha, assuming she was just the cleaning lady, someone who had no influence, no power. But now the truth was out in the open. Martha turned to the rest of the executives. "I've made my decision. You can either follow the changes I implement, or you can leave. But Richard, you're out. Effective immediately." The shock in the room was palpable. Richard stood frozen, his face a mixture of disbelief and anger. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. The power dynamics had shifted in an instant. Martha's calm authority filled the room as she laid out her vision for the company's future. She would restore the company to its former glory, but it would no longer be run by arrogance and greed. She outlined a restructuring plan, focusing on transparency, collaboration, and ethical leadership. One by one, the board members realized the gravity of the situation. Richard's reign was over, and a new era was beginning under Martha's leadership. The journey had only just begun. The events that had transpired in the boardroom marked a pivotal moment in the life of Braxton Company. Richard Braxton, once the almighty CEO, was gone, and Martha, the quiet cleaning lady, was now at the helm. The company had been on the brink of collapse due to his erratic leadership, but the power dynamics had shifted. As Martha walked out of the boardroom, her heart pounded, not from the rush of the confrontation, but from the responsibility now weighing on her shoulders. She had not just saved the company, she had reclaimed it. In the days following Richard's sudden removal, the employees at Braxton Company were in a state of disbelief. Word spread quickly through the building that Martha, quiet, dependable Martha, was now leading the company. For many, it was a shock. How could a woman who had spent years cleaning the offices suddenly become the one to steer the ship? But those who truly knew Martha understood the depth of her knowledge. She had been there since the beginning, long before Richard's reckless ambition led them down the path of ruin. She knew the inner workings of the company like no one else. Her calm demeanor, often mistaken for passivity, had been a silent strength. Now it was time to unleash that power. Martha immediately gathered the key executives and department heads for a series of meetings. The first was with the senior leadership team. They filed into the conference room hesitantly, still grappling with the news of Richard's ousting. Martha stood at the head of the table, the same unassuming woman they had passed in the hallways for years. But now there was an unmistakable authority in her presence. "Thank you all for joining me," she began, her voice calm but firm. "As you know, we are at a crossroads. The company is in a fragile state, but I believe we can rebuild it together. I trust each of you knows the true potential of Braxton Company, and I will need all of you to help me realize that potential." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "We need to shift the culture. No more fear, no more secrecy, no more misguided decisions. We will make this a company of transparency, accountability, and collaboration." The room was silent for a moment before Carl, the executive who had once questioned Richard's leadership, spoke up. "Martha, we're with you. We've all been waiting for a leader like you." The tension that had filled the room for so long began to lift, replaced by a sense of hope and anticipation. Martha had garnered the support of the leadership team, and now the hard work would begin. Martha's first order of business was to address the employees who had been most affected by Richard's reckless decisions. She wanted to assure them that their voices would be heard and that their concerns would be taken seriously. The staff had been left in a constant state of uncertainty under the previous regime, and Martha knew that trust would need to be rebuilt from the ground up. Over the next few weeks, Martha hosted open forums for employees at all levels of the company. These gatherings were informal, but they allowed people to speak freely about their frustrations, their ideas, and their hopes for the future of the company. For the first time in years, employees felt as though they were being listened to. Martha was careful to create an atmosphere of respect and inclusivity. She wasn't just the new CEO. She was a colleague, a mentor, and a guide. She shared her vision for the company's future, not as a top-down directive, but as a shared journey that everyone would embark on together. "You are the heart of Braxton Company," she told the employees at one of the forums. "Without you, there is no company. We will succeed together or we will fail together. But I promise you, I will not let you fail." Her words resonated deeply with the staff. They had been neglected for so long, treated as disposable by Richard and his inner circle. But Martha's approach was different. She didn't see them as mere workers. She saw them as partners in the company's future. As Martha's leadership began to take root, it was clear that significant changes were necessary to undo the damage caused by Richard's leadership. The company had been mismanaged in countless ways. Budgets were ignored, projects were pushed through without proper planning, and the financial discrepancies were far worse than anyone had realized. Martha enlisted the help of the finance team to conduct a full audit of the company's books. What they uncovered was staggering. Millions of dollars had been funneled into vanity projects that had no return on investment, while essential departments were underfunded and understaffed. The company's operational efficiency was in shambles. "We'll need to make some tough decisions," Martha told her leadership team. But these changes are non-negotiable. The future of the company depends on it. One of the first steps Martha took was to implement a new budgeting system that focused on sustainability and long-term growth. She cut back on unnecessary expenses and reallocated resources to departments that had been neglected under Richard's rule. She also introduced performance reviews for all executives, holding them accountable for their actions and decisions. Not everyone was pleased with these changes. Some of the senior managers, who had grown accustomed to Richard's permissive style, resisted Martha's new approach. They found her focus on accountability and transparency uncomfortable, but Martha remained firm. She knew that this was the only way to ensure the company's survival. There were times when Martha felt the pressure mounting. She faced resistance from some employees who were still loyal to Richard, and the company's financial situation continued to be precarious. But she kept moving forward, always reminding herself that the decisions she was making were for the greater good of the company and its employees. Over the next several months, Braxton Company began to show signs of recovery. The company's financial health improved, employee morale skyrocketed, and clients began to return. It was clear that Martha's leadership was making a real difference. The company was no longer teetering on the edge of ruin. It was on the path to success again. But the most satisfying moment for Martha came when Richard, in an attempt to regain control of the company, tried to leverage his old connections to undermine her leadership. He reached out to several former investors, attempting to stage a coup. However, the investors had already seen the positive changes Martha had brought to the company. They saw the renewed optimism among the staff and the steady upward trajectory of the company's finances. In the end, Richard's efforts to sabotage the company failed miserably. The investors sided with Martha, reaffirming her position as the rightful leader of Braxton Company. Richard was not only ousted from his position but was also publicly humiliated as the truth of his mismanagement came to light. His legacy at Braxton Company was tarnished beyond repair. For Martha, this was the ultimate justice. She had taken the company from the brink of collapse and turned it into a thriving, successful enterprise. And in doing so, she had proven that true leadership wasn't about titles or power. It was about integrity, resilience, and the ability to lead with empathy. Martha stood in the boardroom, now fully established as the CEO of Braxton Company. She looked out over the same polished table where, not so long ago, Richard had held court with arrogance and disdain. Now, the room was filled with a sense of camaraderie and purpose. The team she had built was strong, united by a shared vision for the company's future. Looking out the window at the city skyline, Martha felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had saved the company, but more importantly, she had restored the values that had originally made it great. Braxton Company was no longer a company driven by ego. It was a company driven by people, by integrity, and by a shared commitment to success. As Martha prepared for her next set of challenges, she knew that there would always be obstacles. But with the support of her team and the lessons she had learned, she was ready for whatever came next. She had proven that leadership wasn't about where you started, but about where you were willing to go. If you enjoyed the story and want to see more inspiring tales of courage, leadership, and transformation, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means everything to us and helps us bring more incredible stories like this one to life. Stay tuned for more.